This conference will now be recorded.
And we're here with the Arlington Senior Democratic Lunch Group, and our guest today is Josh Katcher, and he has announced his candidacy for Commonwealth's Attorney for Arlington County and the City of Falls Church, and we'll give him a few moments to set forth his ideas, and then we will have a question and answer session. So I give Josh the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. And if at any point you guys can't hear me, please let me know. My computer was not playing nice with the app, so I'm on my phone, put on my earbuds. But if I drop or anything like that, just let me know. The other thing I'll say is I don't really want to be talking at anyone here. I really look forward to having a discussion about this because I think that's the best way to go about doing this. A little bit about myself. I was born and raised here in Northern Virginia. I went to high school at Lake Braddock. I graduated in 2001. After that, I went up to Cornell. I got a double major in government and Asian studies, which was really nothing more than a ticket to grad school. I ended up going to law school back here at UVA. It was nice to come back home, benefit from some in-state tuition. And then after law school, I'd already determined that I wanted to be a local prosecutor at that point. But nonetheless, I went up to New York City to become a corporate litigator for 2 years. And I did that entirely because I was trying to chase my girlfriend and now my wife at the time and convince her to marry me. Thankfully, that worked out. She being an extreme, the smart one in the relationship, she got into Harvard Business School, so she went up to Massachusetts. And at that point, I said, well, I always wanted to go back to Virginia. Is that still the plan? And she said, yeah, that'll work. So I quit my job in New York City, moved back in with my parents, and said that I'm going to now try to go be a local prosecutor, which is what I always wanted to do. And I like to say that I inflicted myself on all of the offices here in Northern Virginia with the goal of getting to become a local prosecutor somewhere. Arlington was willing to let me work as a unpaid fellow, I think was the actual term, but I was basically an unpaid intern at the time. And they let me work there in that capacity for 3 months until a job opened up. And then they finally gave me a job interview, and thank goodness they gave me the opportunity to be an assistant Commonwealth attorney. And I like to say at this point that this was always what I thought my dream job would be. And I was fortunate to learn that being a local prosecutor is what I thought it was going to be. I spent a total of 11 years in the Commonwealth Attorney's Office, 8 for Theostamos, 2.5 for Parissa. When Parissa came in, she assembled her team of prosecutors. I was elated to be one of those that she selected. Soon thereafter, I became the senior line prosecutor in the office. And in fall of last year, I was made a deputy Commonwealth's attorney. In that capacity, I led the largest team in the office. It was a team of 8 junior prosecutors. So not only was it the largest team, but it was a privilege to be given the chance to train up the next generation of prosecutors. And then ultimately, in July, around July of this year, I came to the conclusion that I didn't want to work in the office anymore. And so it was with a heavy heart I resigned. After resigning, I intended to take some time and get a little less burnt out, get my head screwed on straight, figure out what I wanted to do next. I always assumed that I was going to continue to do something in prosecution. I didn't feel like I was done being a prosecutor, but I wanted to take a beat. Intended to get really hyperactively involved in democratic politics, many of you I know, as I have been for many years. But I was going to do that through till the election. I think the impetus for that was Roe v. Wade being overturned. I've got a daughter now, and it really motivated me. So I intended to do that, and in about, I don't know, maybe October, late November, felt the tug to get back in because I was hearing from a lot of people in the community, people who are still in the Commonwealth Attorney's Office, and the police department, and even the defense bar, probation as well, that things continue to not be going in the direction that I thought they should be going. And as a consequence of that, I decided, you know what, I think I have strong enough feelings about this that I want to run to be the Commonwealth's attorney. My commitment is real reform and real justice. That is very purposefully chosen language. When I talk about real reform, I like to talk about it to non-lawyers in the following way. reform prosecution has not ever been, nor will it ever be, about leniency. It's being unfortunately caricatured by some as such, but it's not. Reform prosecution is about precision and the application of judicial resources. And what do I actually mean by that? Imagine like a line, and on one side of the line, you have those cases that are in the justice system that I would say just about everyone in the community would like to see aggressively prosecuted: murder, rape, robbery, serious gun charges, serious drug dealing, not marijuana, gun cases, gang cases. And then on the other side of the line, you have those cases of individuals who find themselves in the justice system, frankly, because of policy failures elsewhere. Kids doing dumb kid stuff, the serious mentally ill, the addicted, the homeless. A reform prosecutor is able to identify which side of the line a case is on. And then when they're on the side of the line of policy failures, they're able to identify how best to divert that person out of the system to prevent them from getting a conviction and to connect them with services that they need and deserve. More generally, what I would say is that reform prosecution, I see it as a rejection of the law and order approach of yesteryear. It's a rejection of the one size fits all blunt force approach that uses incarceration as its only tool. Or stated from another direction, it's really a contextualization or a humanization of every single case. That's the type of reform prosecution that I believe in, that I think we need to be doing. But I also use the language real justice because when we're thinking about these issues, we need to all realize that justice for victims is bedrock in our system, as is justice for the accused, and as are just outcomes for the convicted. So I've chosen that language purposefully because I feel like right now, the way that things are going in the office, there are some real obstacles in the way of real reform and real justice happening. And so that's really what has motivated me to run. In terms of my experience, I have, as I said, been in the office for 11 years. I have tried cases in every single courtroom in that courthouse. That includes juvenile domestic relations, cases in the general district court, and cases in the circuit court. And what I hope we get to do at a point is have a discussion really about the Commonwealth, what they do, what the Commonwealth Attorney's Office does, because I know a lot of people have a general understanding of it, but I'd love to get into the details and the nitty gritty of it. I've tried every type of case, almost every type of case you can have in the courthouse, from traffic infractions up to and including murder. And I have had the opportunity to train up prosecutors around the state, train up police officers, both in roll call trainings here in Arlington, and our partners agencies. I'm not sure how many people know this, but because of the way of where Arlington is situated, we interact with a number of law enforcement agencies. So Park Police, Pentagon Police Force, Metro Transit, Metropolitan Washington Airport Authority. We're responsible for the City of Falls Church, ACPD, Virginia State Police. So there's a lot of police officers to interact with and to train up and help out however best we can. And the final thing I'll say before I'd like to open it up is the stakes. What are the stakes of this election? For me, the core issue is not, should we do reform? I think we as a community have already decided that. I'm all in on the reform prosecution mission. The real question is, how are we going to go about executing it? And are we going to be able to execute it to take advantage of the promise of reform? The concern that I have is that if we don't execute it properly, we have a limited window of opportunity here. Probably the next 4 or 6 years, we need to get this right. Otherwise, we're going to have missed this generational window of opportunity to execute on the promise of reform. And so that's why I feel such like a fierce intensity and urgency around this race. That's kind of my high level pitch. We can get into the nitty gritty on various issues if you'd like. I can go very basic and talk about what the Commonwealth Attorney's Office does. If you're interested, I'm more than willing to kind of tell you what a day-to-day looks like for a prosecutor, because as I said, I was a line prosecutor for many, many years. So I guess I'd like to open up the floor and just,
Sure.
take some questions if that's okay.
All right. Well, I get the privilege of the first question as the moderator, and then if other people want to raise their hands or wave their hands in the window or signal something in the chat, I'll come up with a few for questions. A lot of people talk, Josh, about social justice, and And I think that means the quality of justice for people at the top versus people at the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder. And for me, as a lawyer, I personally think that everybody is entitled to a fair judicial system and is entitled to essentially a life that is free from fear of crime and so on. But that the problem is that white collar crime in America perhaps is not being pursued as rigorously or smoothly as perhaps things like drug offenses are. And so we had in the news today that this Sam Bankman-Fried has been, finally arrested and is being prosecuted by DOJ and the SEC and so on for stealing allegedly billions of dollars, and that's good. But it really strikes me that the place where your office could potentially get involved is in things like, January 6th, where at least I read in some press reports that people kept their cache of guns in Northern Virginia for various legal reasons, and that you could imagine uh, events transpiring that would involve violations of law in Northern Virginia as well as the District of Columbia. You also can imagine white collar crimes that involved theft wage of theft of wages or shortchanging uh, subcontractors and things. So like, do you feel, in your opinion, that the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office is equipped to handle a hypothetical future white collar crime if it happened in Arlington or Falls Church, and has the expertise to successfully prosecute that with the current level of staff and its training and so on?
All right, so Bob, there's a lot to address there, and I'm going to try to unpack it.
Sure.
I'm going to start off because I think you may have a better sense for how venue and jurisdiction work than some of the other folks on here. So I'm going to start off somewhat basic and build up from there, if you all will allow that. The Commonwealth Attorney's Office is responsible for prosecuting all the crimes that occur here in Arlington. Their typical crime is going to be state crimes that are like gangs, guns, murder, all the way down to traffic infractions. It's helpful to think about, okay, well, then what does a federal prosecutor do? For example, the U.S. Attorney's Office from the Eastern District of Virginia. They actually are situated in such a way that they have jurisdictional access to things that happen in Arlington County. So the first question is, what type of cases are brought in Arlington County Commonwealth Attorney's Office versus the U.S. Attorney's Office that has access to Arlington? The big, wide-ranging federal cases, you kind of probably know them: pharmaceutical fraud, multi-jurisdictional gang cases, public corruption. Those are the type of cases that come to mind that are like strictly criminal. You also have SEC, which is the Securities Exchange Council. They're responsible for a lot of the monetary, it's kind of like the high-level white crime, usually involving financial transactions, cross state boundaries. So when we start with that, the question then becomes, is the crimes you're talking about, are they really situated, strictly speaking, in Arlington? Are they just passing through Arlington, so we have access to them via venue? Or are they truly federal crimes that we really aren't involved with and may not even have jurisdiction? So that's how I would start by addressing that. The next question is, when you say white collar, what does that mean? White collar crimes can mean anything from false pretense, meaning you work at the counter at Victoria's Secret, and because of your position of employment, you're able to steal things. That's, embezzlement. And when you use the word embezzlement, some people think of, something happening up in New York City in big stock exchanges, but you can have it locally, or you can have the type of stuff with the cryptocurrency guy that is currently going to be prosecuted federally. As for the January 6th crimes, a lot of those obviously were situated in DC, but you're correct, there were people who were passing through Arlington. I was actually involved in a prosecution of one person who came down from upstate New York with a number of weapons on his in his possession, generally speaking, let's say that. And then he fired off a couple rounds in Arlington. I'm not sure how many of you remember. I think it got a little bit of coverage on Arl Now, but it was a man who literally fired off a weapon while in Arlington County. That's something that was perfectly situated for the Arlington Commonwealth Attorney's Office to prosecute, because he may have been on his way to DC to do what he wanted to do, but here he was in Arlington committing a specific crime that was a specific state crime. And I think your final question was, are we equipped, especially for something like wage theft? I'm going to be candid with you. I have not seen a single case of wage theft brought as a charge in Arlington in the 11 years I was a prosecutor. It's possible that there are some charges that I didn't see, but that's not, I don't think that's something that we are seeing a lot of. That doesn't mean to say it's not happening, but I don't believe our local ACPD or the Virginia State Police, our local state police folks, are the ones investigating that. That would probably be investigated by a statewide committee, probably the Economic Council. There's a committee name for that I can't remember, but they might be the ones who would be doing those investigations. And then when it's situated in Arlington County or specifically associated with Arlington County, they could bring it. Don't see a lot of those. There's no reason we wouldn't be able to prosecute them, though, because those cases have a little more sophistication because of the financial institutions associated with it. But any type of prosecutor who is doing relatively high-level property crimes, I think would be able to handle those type of things. What I will say is that the number of prosecutors in the office at this point who have exposure to those type of high-level property crime jury trials or bench trials, you could probably count on one hand, because of the number of experienced prosecutors that have recently left the office. So I don't mean to suggest that it would be impossible, because I think that there's some great prosecutors who remain in the office. And I think these statewide investigators, they could put their back into it and get it done. But oftentimes the type of crimes that you're talking about are better situated in a federal prosecutor's office.
Okay, well, thank you for your answer. Steve Ferber raised his hand. Steve, do you have a question?
Yeah. Hi, Mr. Katcher. I was wondering, since we already, of course, have somebody in the office, and you seem to have some disagreement or problems with her handling of that office, could you, just give us a flavor of what it is you're concerned about and why you want to replace her?
So Steve, feel free to call me Josh first off. And I want to make it very
Yeah.
clear that,
Okay.
please, um, none of the criticism I have is personality based. From what I saw in the office, I have concerns about the way things are being managed. In the past 12 months, 12 attorneys have put in their notice. It's a 21-person office, so that's more than 50%. I believe there are currently 6 or 7 unfilled, fully funded vacancies. And when I talk about reform prosecution, I said earlier that it requires a humanization and a contextualization. Let me put a little meat on that bone and explain what I mean. When you're a prosecutor, you get a stack of cases, right? And you need to get through them in a way that is efficient but still effective. When you were doing, like, if you're going to engage in simple law and order prosecution, where it is go get a conviction and seek a large sentence, you don't really need to explore anything outside of the case file. You don't need to interact with opposing counsel. You don't really need to consider what services might be best put in place. I reject that. I think a reform prosecutor, it's incumbent upon us as reform prosecutors to move beyond what's found in the case file and try to do the best thing we can to ensure that if it's a person who's in the system because of a policy failure, that we're going to do everything we can to help them get out of the system so that the system doesn't impact them and that they don't come back in. That requires a lot more time and a lot more training. And what I see happening in the office right now, because of the staffing issues, is that unfortunately, we're not able to engage in the type of reform prosecution that we really want to be doing. And so that's when I say real reform. I think real reform happens in the courtroom. I think it happens in the people, and I think it relates to the cases that are being handled. And because of the way that the office is dealing with some staffing issues, we're not able to do the type of real reform that we want to do because we are just not equipped from a capacity standpoint to do it. And I want to make one other thing very clear. I know many of the people in the office still. I consider them brothers and sisters because we have been in the trenches together. And they are doing the absolute best they can. I think they're not being put in a place to do the best type of prosecution that they think they're very capable of doing. And I think that's why it's less a question about do we believe in reform and more a question of how are we going to execute on that so that we don't miss out on the promise of reform.
So you're saying because of the lack of personnel, you're just kind of having to rush through cases and just do the minimum as far as concern for the reasons for uh, the crime and how to, perhaps avoid it in the future.
I think it is a logical conclusion that when the office is staffed potentially at 21 people and there are only 15 or so people in the office, when you're down almost 25%, I can't quite do math, but if you're down almost 25%, that means that you're not able to function at the highest possible level you could be functioning at. And the additional thing I can tell you is that the overall experience level in the office has dropped precipitously in the past 12 to 18 months. And what that means is that the people who are new, earnest, decent, really interested in doing the best possible job they can, they don't have the same level of supervision and mentorship that they ought to have. And that's not good for their organic development of talent. And it also means that the most experienced prosecutors who are handling the most difficult cases are stretched thinner. And that's obviously not the way that you want to be handling the most serious cases either.
And one
Okay.
real quick, I
Steve,
just
let's let other people have a chance rather than going back and forth,
but
because
he
I
but
know
he
that.
but he implied that he'd lost 12 uh, uh, employees there. You almost implied there was a reason for that.
I think they're leaving because they're unsatisfied with the way that the office is being run. I will not say that all 12, but I've worked very closely with many of them. Some of them have gone on to other Commonwealth attorneys' offices in Virginia. I think that's telling. The things that they have privately told me for their reasons for leaving, or that we were told they conveyed to people in management for their reasons for leaving, suggest to me that they were disappointed with the way that things were being run.
Okay, Steve, we're going to leave it there. And Jim Webster had his hand up. Do you still have a question, Jim?
Thanks, Bob. Josh, it's good to see you.
Hi,
I
Jim.
should tell the rest of the people that I was impressed with the way that Josh handled a special grand jury on which I served for several months last year and earlier this year.
Bob, I'm going to counsel you don't get into too much detail because we're not allowed to talk about that.
Oh, no, we're not going to talk about it. We did not produce a 69-page report as a special grand jury in Loudoun County did recently. And I'd like to ask you about how a special grand jury is set up, who picks the members. I don't know who picked me. Uh, I thought maybe, well, it was Paul Ferguson, the clerk of courts. Maybe it was Paris. I don't know. And I certainly don't know who picked the members out in Loudoun County, although there's some suspicion it could be the Attorney General of Virginia influencing the selection of members of that. Is that possible?
Well, so let me answer that. Do you mind if I grab my drink real quick? I'll be back in a sec. I think you guys can still hear me. Okay, so Jim, do you
Sure.
have your
No,
question?
you're doing a great job, Josh. And of course, I would caution everybody, we're talking about the general question, hypothetical question of who picks grand juries. And I think statutorily, it's the clerk's office that's responsible for impaneling them.
So that's what I was going to say. I can't speak to what's happened in Loudoun. I've followed it the same way I think many of you have. But statutorily, the clerk of the court is the one who calls together the grand jury, the special grand jury, for the same reason that they're the ones who call together the grand jury. They're also the same people who summon people for jury duty. As for what's going on Loudoun, like again, like I said, I followed it. I have no information or specific reason to believe that there are any type of machinations going on for who is going to be on the special grand jury out there. So I'm just kind of as much in I'm as much in the dark as you are.
Jim, do you have a question, or is that it?
That's it.
Carol?
Well, hi, Josh. Um, Carol Burnett here.
Hey, Carol.
I, I was, I'm a little concerned about when you say, when your notion about people leaving the office, that this is something that's happening with every company and every organization nationwide right now. I mean, every day we read in the newspaper that people are resigning in droves to seek other opportunities and to live differently after COVID and everything. So I just wonder if it isn't just being a bit disingenuous to say that that the problem to be using this resignation as some representation of that there's this major problem in the Commonwealth Attorney's Office, because this is a nationwide problem that people are resigning.
So I don't think it's disingenuous at all, because I know most of these people and I know why they left, and I had many discussions with them as they struggled with having to make the difficult decision of whether to leave what they would describe candidly as their dream job. I think it's again telling that some have gone to other Commonwealth attorneys' offices, and I think it's also telling that we can't fill these positions because I think unfortunately, people are hearing about what's happening in the office and they no longer want to come. And I would compare and contrast this a little bit with the experience we had at the beginning of the administration, when I strongly suspect we were turning away people because there was so much interest. And even when I was working in the office under Theo, this should be the most desirable office to work at in all of Virginia. It's Arlington County, after all. We are a desirable place to live. We pay very well. And when I was trying to get a job many years ago, people used to be like, I wouldn't go work in Arlington. There never's going to be an opening there. So I really don't think it's disingenuous. And from what I'm hearing from people who are still in the office, this isn't like the Great Resignation. People who are doing this job are doing it because they want to do this job. They, of course, could make more money doing it elsewhere, but they do it because they love it. I mean, for most people, it's their dream job. And when they get there, doing the job itself, they love it. I mean, I really do think that's a pretty strong held belief.
Okay, JD Spain, you're next. Unmute yourself, JD.
Yes, I have. Hey, Josh, how are you?
That's good.
I'm gonna probably second a lot of what I just heard Carol stated as it relates to people leaving. I mean, you work there, so I'm in corporate America, and I tend to agree that we can't even keep people. They're always resigning. We can't keep people in ACPD because they're resigning. So I think this is going on. Unless we've actually been there, we don't know. My question to you is, you said earlier that this is not personality based, but I keep hearing these pieces in your conversation about how morale is broken. Um, Parissa refuses to try cases. That all lends, to me, it seems personality based. Um, what is your relationship in the community? As you know, I'm president NAACP, but what is your relationship with community advocates, criminal justice reform in Arlington community? What has that been like over the past decade?
JD, let me start by asking if you want me to address that or the
You can
part
give me
about keeping people in the office. I
Well,
don't mind addressing either way.
I think we've already heard you. No, let's not repeat what you said to Carol, but I have a different thought on that. Let's just talk about the other two.
Okay, so the other two were, what was the first one? Because the second one was community engagement.
Yeah, let's talk about community engagement. What has been your level of community engagement prior to running in the past 10 years?
Okay, so I've been actively involved as a Cornell Democrat for years, going back to 2012 when I moved to Arlington from New York City. I came back to my parents' house, as I said, and then when I got the job in Arlington, I became very hyperactively involved in the Cornell Democrats. And that was before I had kids. But initially, I was a precinct captain in Virginia
The
Square.
Arlington Democrats we're talking about.
Yes. I was a
Yeah.
precinct captain in Virginia Square. I subsequently became an area chair over there. Around that time, I think was when Kip was still in charge of ACDC. He asked me to run the joint campaign. So we did that in 2015. In 2016, I was in charge of voter registration for Hillary Clinton, or for the ACDC's effort for Hillary Clinton. We had a record-breaking year for voter registration. 2017, I think, was the year that I was the finance director of the party. 2018, my kids came along, my daughter Juliet, so I had to pull back in 2018. At that time, I had been in the office for about 7 years, so I became very, very, very busy doing what I would consider to be my general portfolio, which was gangs, guns, and violent crime. 2016, we had the primary. I had my kid obviously at the point, so I was really basically just making sure that my young one was okay, supporting my wife in what was a new job for her, still trying to remain involved in Dems. I think at that point I was involved with absentee voting. And then the election happened. Parissa kept me on, increased the responsibility, going from just kind of like a relatively mid to senior level prosecutor to her senior line prosecutor. And then it was 2020. We have COVID hit. Around that time, we learned that we were pregnant with our second kid. And so, we've got two kids at that point. So I further pulled back. I stayed involved as a precinct captain over in Boston at the time. And in 2021, when I was made a deputy, two young kids. At that point, we moved because I live over in the West area now. And at that time, I joined Mary Detweiler as a co-area chair for the West area. And and then also, let's see, and then I was made deputy. As I said earlier, I was in charge of the team of 8. One other thing I'll throw on top of this was that until very recently, I was on the Virginia State Bar Council, which is the board that oversees all of the lawyers in the state. And so obviously I had a lot going on, but my general involvement has always been through Cornell Dems. That's been kind of the focal points. And when there were opportunities to be involved, for example, I remember being down in the Valley for a restoration of felons' voting rights. I've always tried to take those opportunities. But what happened is once my kids came along and once I got progressively more responsible in the office, my ability to be as actively involved in various other organizations was severely constrained.
Okay, thank you. I mean, we'll speak later. I won't take up all your time. It sounds like you have a lot of ACDC involvement, which is great. And the second question was, how is it, you talked earlier about your campaign not being personality based, but you also mentioned mentorship there's a problem in the office, morale is broken, refusing to track all that's tied strictly to personalities. So I'm just trying to understand. It sounds like you're saying two different things to me. Anyways,
Yeah, so let me just respond to that real quick. So the point is, I have no interest in dragging Parissa. I think she's absolutely sincere, and I think we share a lot of philosophical desires here. And so when I'm saying this stuff, I really want to make it as clear as possible that it's like it is a function of me criticizing what I see as the management of the office and the leadership of the office, and not her in any way like a personal political attack. I have no interest in doing that.
thank you.
Josh, if I could ask a couple of clarifying questions. So the way the office is set up, how is the public outreach and education managed? Is that like held by Theo or Parissa, or does that get farmed out to individual assistant Commonwealth attorneys? So if the PTA wanted to have a speaker about criminal justice, would that be something that Theo or Parissa would do as opposed to a Josh Katcher or another lower person?
So I can answer that in two ways. I think the way that those requests come in are either through there's a formal email request opportunity, or you can just go direct with the Commonwealth's attorney if you've got a connection with them personally. And then what I've seen happen is that if it comes in and someone's got a specific focus in whatever the thing might be, typically it's for the Commonwealth's attorney to decide if they want to do it or not. And then if they don't want to do it, you find someone to do it. So for example, I was asked by GMU Law School to do a guest appearance and lecture on a class about prosecution. So I was allowed to do that. But I think the way it should be done is if you give a lot of people in the office opportunities to kind of grow and be involved in the community, you expand the number of people in the office who have strong connections with the community. And I think that's how it should happen. But I think the office should be engaged as often as they can, especially because we want people to believe in their office and to feel connection to their office and to feel like they can go to the office if they have an issue. My concern would be, of course, relatively similar to what I said previously, that if you don't have the capacity to handle that, which is already just within the office, you have to make a prioritization decision about whether you want someone to handle the murder case or go out and talk to the kids in the schools. And at the end of the day, I think you have to support the former. When you have the capacity of a fully staffed 21-person office, you have more flexibility to try to staff out more things.
Okay, thank you. I think that Carol Burnett is our next. No, I'm sorry, Derek Malice is our next hand raised. Unmute yourself, Derek.
Thank you. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Yes.
Thank you. I guess I don't know if it's so much of a question as a comment, but and excuse me because I'm really not intimately familiar with the workings of the Commonwealth Attorney's Office. But one thing that I was very impressed with in early in Parissa's regime, if you will, back when Theo was a district attorney, I had a friend who had a very unfortunate situation where either a late elementary school or early middle school child had, I think, taken a medication to school. It was kind of a show and tell thing for this kid, but Theo's office ended up prosecuting this case, and it took my friend a year or more to finally clear get rid of this case, expunge the issue from their child, and it harkens back to me in my day when, of course, this is a long time ago, but something like that would happen. I would be disciplined by the school. I'd be disciplined again at home. I would learn my lesson, and that would be it. But this was a very traumatic thing for the family, for the child, very expensive for the parents to get this resolved. And I think Parissa has certainly set the right tone in terms of prioritizing more serious kinds of crime. So I mean, that's a comment. But I guess my question would be, you had mentioned that there are obstacles in the Commonwealth Attorney's Office. Now, I clearly am hearing the one of morale that you're talking about. But are there what specific obstacles did you deal with that discouraged you or caused your resignation that is causing these morale problems?
Well, if I can start by addressing kind of the juvenile justice component, is that all right, real quick, Derek?
Yes.
So when I was describing how I view reform prosecution, I think policy failures such as kids doing dumb kid things resulting in them getting in the justice system is exactly the type of case that we don't want to see in our justice system. I mean, the two default positions, I think, for any reform prosecutor has to be: one, the best place for a kid is not in the system, and two, if they're going to be in the system, they shouldn't be certified as an adult. And I think that there's probably fairly widespread agreement on that at this point. But I think it's important to start by saying that what I would like to do that would be different than what's currently going on in the office as it relates to juvenile justice is specifically be one of the prosecutors in the rotation for the Juvenile and Domestic Relations Court. That is not currently being done. And I think juvenile justice is so important that we can't afford to get it wrong. And I think I, as a Commonwealth attorney, will be down in that rotation, because I think it's important that the Commonwealth attorney be down there and know what's going on in that course and that court, have their finger on the pulse. And from a leadership standpoint, I don't think that the Commonwealth attorney really ought to be asking people to do things that they're not willing to do themselves. And that's the way I'm going to choose to run my office. And I think that's an important thing to do. So your other question was about obstacles. The greatest obstacle right now is the fact that prosecutors are being overworked and undertrained, and that's a consequence of the staffing in the office right now. And there's really no getting around that. Like I think back in 2018, before we had body-worn camera, I believe we had 16 people in the office, and that was when the CA was actually trying cases. I think we're now at 16 people again, and we have hundreds of hours of body-worn camera that needs to be reviewed. Ethically, we have to do it. So the overall workload has become staggeringly high, and there has been additional funded Commonwealth attorney spots provided by the county board in light of that. But if you consider that there's all that additional work that's been put upon the Commonwealth attorneys in the office now, and it's the same number of people that it was back in 2018, I think it becomes clear what the obstacles are. I mean, you just cannot prosecute a case as fulsomely as you would want to. And when I say that, I don't think you can spend as much time on each case, because the number of cases has not gone down either.
Do you have a follow-up, Derek, or is that it?
No, not really.
Okay. So who I don't see anyone else with their hands up, so I'll ask another question, which is, a big thing is technology, and you see this quite a bit. If you were following the Mar-a-Lago documents case, a lot of it was like, how do you do electronic discovery between the Justice Department and Trump's lawyers and so on. Do you think that there are things that could be done in the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office or in the state of Virginia generally to improve the technology for prosecutors and both case management and discovery and so on?
Well, let me start by saying something. I've led by saying that I think Parissa and I agree on many things. And I think that the way that we're now doing discovery in the office is exactly how we should have always been doing it, and that we were not previously doing it. And let me get a little granular here. The way it used to work is we had something called open file discovery. You would go in, if you were a defense attorney, you had to write down pretty much everything. It was highly inefficient. And the way I've always wanted to be as a prosecutor is I want to give the defense attorney every single opportunity they have to make the best case they possibly have. So when we prevail at trial, we've not only buttressed the integrity of that case, but the system at large. And what we are now doing is we are providing electronic discovery, meaning we just send everything along to the defense attorney and we put the appropriate protections in place. I think that actually makes a discovery a lot easier from the defense side, so that's good for the system itself. I think it also makes it easier from our standpoint, because when you go entirely electronic, you can scan things and electronically manipulate them. So I wanted to make sure that it's clear that everyone appreciates, I'm not just here to drag Parissa. I think we've done some good things. That being said, we also have body-worn camera, and that is going to be the real challenge of this coming generation, because right now it's essentially an unfunded mandate. We have purchased the equipment so that we can capture all this body cam footage, but there are still ethical requirements that your prosecutors watch every single bit of that footage. And let me give you like an example to why this gets pretty outrageous. If at 4 o'clock in the morning, ACPD shows up for someone trespassing in front of a hotel somewhere, and 8 police cruisers all show up, you've got 8 police cruiser cameras and 8 body cameras, assuming there's not a supervisor there. And let's say it's an hour-long interaction as the ACPD tries to get the person to kind of move on or connect them with some services, and they reluctantly refuse to do that, and ultimately the person gets placed under arrest for trespass. When you get that case and you realize there's 8 hours of footage for a simple trespass, one that is, again, exactly the type of case that we want to divert out of the system, you realize how staggeringly difficult this can become, because that's just a trespass case. That's not a DUI. That's not a felony malicious wounding. That's not a gang case. That's not a gun case. And that's certainly not a murder case. So where I'm going with this is, I think this is the frontier of prosecutors in the 21st century. Either the ethics are going to have to change, which I don't know if that's a good idea. I don't think it is, because we still want people to do their due diligence and appropriately know what's going on in their cases so that they can meaningfully interact with opposing counsel and come up with an appropriate, equitable outcome. So I think maybe we're going to have to use artificial intelligence to screen the footage and figure out what parts are specifically the part that we need to look at or not. Or we as a community need to say, listen, we're happy that these ethics still are there, and that's exactly how we want to see prosecution done in the 21st century, but it's going to require more money. And what I will say lastly is that if you look at the number of prosecutors we have in Arlington on a per capita basis, and you compare it to some other jurisdictions that are similarly situated from a density standpoint, we're still understaffed. We should have more than 21 attorneys in the office. We should probably have like 30 or 35 attorneys in the office. So if we really want to do meaningful 21st century prosecution and be really up to speed on our cases, really contextualize and really humanize our cases, we're not only going to need to be able to change people's interest in coming to the office, but we're going to need to probably change the overall amount of staff the office has.
Do you want to comment on plea bargaining? I understand that a very high percentage of the cases that arrive in the office are disposed of by pleas versus trials. Is there anything you'd like to say about that subject?
Well, I think most people don't realize that that's kind of the natural order of things, that many things are going to be worked out by means of a plea. I don't think, well, I think the natural order of things right now is that things are happening that way because of the demands on both sides of the V. I think defense attorneys and defendants usually, if they realize that they're going to lose the case, or whether they're guilty, or if they're guilty, determine that they want to take a plea to minimize their downside risk. And I think prosecutors, realizing that there's always some trial risk, you never know what a jury is going to say, even if it's a slam dunk case, they oftentimes want to offer plea agreements. Furthermore, plea agreements are offered for purposes of efficiency. I mean, it's conceivable that you could prosecute everyone to the fullest extent of the law if you had full capacity, but first off, from a reform standpoint, that doesn't make sense. And second off, from an efficiency standpoint, it certainly doesn't make sense. So yeah, I think that's how plea bargains really kind of are situated. But that being said, there's still an awful lot of trials, and I think that's a good thing. I mean, we should be testing our cases and making sure that everyone involved is doing the things that they're supposed to be doing.
Okay. JD, you have your hand up, but do you want to ask a second question?
Yeah, I want to go back to something Josh mentioned before you asked him that question about, I made a note. You were talking, Josh, about the body-worn camera program and shortages of uh, lawyers, basically. I think there's a couple things going on, right? So one, yeah, you may be short-staffed, but also we also have to look at over policing, right? So if you have police, responding to or responding aggressively to minor offenses, right? Trespassing, for example. Yeah, you're going to get 8 police officers with all this camera footage. So I think there's a little bit of blame to go on a lot of people, right? We need to talk to ACPD about some of these calls. How many cops does it need? Do we need to show up? for a trespassing call, you know.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
We at NAACP, we get several reports of people claiming, over policing. Not saying that's what's going on here, but I think it's a little bit to go around for everybody here, right? To find efficiencies and new methodologies and approaches of how we may be policing here in Arlington. So I just want to throw that out there and get your thoughts on what about a conversation about, with ACPD about their response to minor offenses.
So yeah, I completely agree. So I think one of the key distinctions I bring to this race is that I have had an 11-year relationship with ACPD, and I think it's a fairly positive relationship. I wouldn't say it's a perfect relationship or the best relationship because I've been pretty candid with them when I think that they bring cases that could be better done. Or I have sometimes offline made it be known that I don't think we need to have a police officer show up for a simple trespass. So I think it's absolutely worthwhile to have that conversation. There's an efficiency standpoint, there's an efficacy standpoint that I think is a great thing that we could be interacting with. So like I have no problems with that at all. And I think it also then would alleviate the amount of body worn camera that would have to be reviewed by people in the office. So there's greater efficiencies to be had there as well.
Correct. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we've run out of questions, which seems impossible because we always have an infinite number of questions. But I would ask you to just summarize for like 2 minutes and tell us where your website is and tell us about your campaign.
Sure. Thank you. So let me start by saying thank you for having me. This is an enjoyable thing for me to do, and I look forward to doing more of this in the community. We had our first meet and greet last night, and a lot of these similar questions are coming up. I'm happy that we as a community are engaging in them. And I'm also happy because the narrative frame for this race seems to be setting, which is we agree that reform prosecution is what Arlington wants. And then the question is, what exactly does that look like and how exactly do we execute on that? I think when I talk about reform prosecution, it's the type of thing that is almost not political. And I think that's good that that's where we're getting here in Arlington. I think it's a question of how are we going to execute on this? How are we going to execute on the promise of 21st century prosecution so that we don't forfeit this opportunity, which is, I believe, a window of opportunity that's not going to last more than 4 or 6 years, and people are going to move on. And that's why I feel such urgency to run. We cannot afford to allow this to be anything other than a success. And the concern that I have is that if the office is perceived as not doing this the right way, people may come to the conclusion that reform prosecution is a failure, and I don't want that to happen. So that's kind of the high level core of what's going on. If anyone wants to reach out to me, my website is joshforarlington.com, or if you're in Falls Church, joshforfallschurch.com. We have social media handles on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I don't know how many of you are on Instagram, but what I will say is we're going to be using that kind of as like a behind the scenes of what actually happens on a campaign, because this is my first campaign. I don't expect to be a particularly great candidate, but I haven't done it myself, so we'll find out. So if that's something that intrigues you, please look us up that way. And lastly, Bob can give you my email address. I respond. He can give you my you all have my permission to give out my personal email address. If you think of any questions after you get off this call and you want to follow up, have a phone call, I'll come sit on your porch. You can come over to my house. We'll keep talking. That's what I want to do. I want this to be a dialogue, and I think it's an important dialogue for all of Arlington. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Josh, and we'll cut off the recording now.
Bob, I had